Hi, welcome back to this week's installation of a Biselleh Torah. On Shabbat, we'll be celebrating not only Shabbat, but the confluence of Hanukkah, meeting it head on. And on this sacred Shabbat, we will have a special Matthias reading, and we will be also reading a special Haftarah. But the usual Torah reading, Vayashev, we will be reading as we ought to and as we do from year to year. This week's Sidra contains an element which most of us would rather avoid reading about, and most of us rabbis would rather not preach on either. It's the story of Yehuda and Tamar. Tamar married a man who ultimately died. She married his brother. He died as well. And she would have married a third, but was prevented from doing so by Yehuda. Meanwhile, Yehuda, perhaps hungry for company, sees a prostitute by the road and has relationships with her. Not long afterward, he discovers that his daughter-in-law, Tamar, is now pregnant. He accuses her of being a harlot, of being a prostitute, and wants to destroy her for her sin. But it was he who committed the sin, not her. It's a very painful story of accusations, of pillorying verbally. And the story has resonances of a couple of weeks ago when we also read of another woman whose name was Dina. Dina, one of the siblings, many siblings of Jacob, went out into the field to meet her girlfriends, to have a relationship with them, to be able to talk and to schmooze. And while she was exploring those outer regions a little bit far from her home, a man, Shechem, saw her, raped her. The story that ensues is even more painful, if that's possible, than that original story. And why I share this with us today is because it seems like the past is never very far away from us, is it? The past seems to not only refuse to be forgotten, but recurs time and again. For in our day, we're now reading of the stories and seeing of the episodes of Hamas brutalizing women, raping them, cutting their body parts off, torturing them beyond belief. And the stories that refuse to be heard by the general public. The Me Too movement has seemingly divorced these Jewish women who have been so afflicted, so abused, from their collective understanding that these are people too. Why are we not telling their stories? Why are their voices not being heard? And even those who have been brutalized and murdered by Hamas, why are their stories being covered up? It compounds the pain beyond the realm of what is right, what is moral, and what is certainly understandable by us. During these days of Hanukkah, we generally tell the story of Hanukkah with a different lens than what actually occurred. We don't, for example, read the story of the Maccabees as told by the books of the Maccabees that were never canonized. And with your permission, I'd like to share with you just a brief excerpt from the first book of Maccabees, which again, few of us have exposure to. Her adornment has all been taken away. Instead of a free woman, she has become a slave. Behold, our sanctuary and our beauty and our glory has been laid waste, and the heathen have profaned them. Why should we live any longer? At that point, Matthias, and his sons rip their clothes as a sign of mourning and sit on the ground in dust and ashes, bewailing the fate that has happened to the people, the children, the women, the seniors, the men. All of those individuals, too, many of whom are still being held as hostage by Hamas. In our time, against their will, tortures are coming out that we are reading of by some of the released captives that are falling upon the men. This is broad, and these are stories that need to be told. So we don't read the stories of the Maccabees. We don't read the story of the afflictions and the abuse that they took at the hands of their oppressors, the Syrian Greeks. Instead, we tell the story of light, of hope, of possibility of redemption. And we need to retell that story again tonight, singing songs of hope and redemption and possibility. But at the same time, dare we forget those individuals that are still being held hostage against their will? Dare we forget the women that have been brutalized and mutilated, and many of whom have been murdered, and those who need to live with the scars of what was done to them as well? Those stories also need to be told. On this Hanukkah, we pray for light. We pray for redemption. We pray for hope. We pray for the release of the prisoners. I hope that next year at this time we'll be telling a different story of Hanukkah. But on this Hanukkah night, we need to tell two stories. One of pain, one of hope. Shabbat Shalom.